Alright, so today we're going to learn about the Crusades and the growth of Europe. We have 3 daily objectives. Number 1, explain the causes and consequences of the Crusades. Number 2, describe the reasons why Catholic Spain probably engaged in an inquisition. And number 3, explain the importance of the commercial revolution. So we've talked about how this is an age of faith. We've got the Catholic Church, who is at the center of medieval Europe. This kind of shows us the different sizes of the countries at this point. We've got Castile and Aragon down here, which are eventually going to form into Spain. We've got England and Scotland. We've got the Holy Roman Empire, which is super confusing, and don't worry about the name, but it's basically just Germany. We've got France, which is slowly trying to form. Italy's still a long ways away. But notice there's really one cool thing down here, the Papal States. So the Pope actually has his own kingdom at this point in history, called the Papal States. We've got the Byzantine Empire still barely hanging on, but most of this is the Ottoman Turks. Alright, so, however, as the Dark Ages continued, fewer and fewer people could, including priests, could read. Pope Leo IX and Gregory VII outlawed the practice of simony, which is the practice of selling church positions, and the marriage of priests. The marriages of priests does end at this point. Unfortunately, the Catholic Church is going to continue to sell positions. If you want to be a cardinal, let me get some gold. If you want to be a bishop, let me get some gold. But that is eventually going to turn into the Protestant Reformation. The Catholic Church also restructures the church to resemble an earthly kingdom. If you, again, think in terms of the Papal States and how the Pope is building his own country and trying to assert himself as the emperor of all of this, kind of like the old Roman Empire. So the Pope sends diplomats across Europe to enforce church law. We've talked about diplomacy. A diplomat is just someone who engages in diplomacy, so basically the art of negotiation. The Pope has this thing called excommunication, the power of excommunication. And basically what the excommunication is if the Pope, he writes down this thing called a papal bull, which is basically just a law. He writes down on his papal bull, he says, all right, King Henry VIII, I don't like you, because you keep getting new wives, so I'm excommunicating you. And what that means is Henry VIII, as an example, is no longer part of the Catholic Church, and as a result, is going to hell. So, the Pope believes that he has the power to send people directly to hell. And this convinces the toughest of kings to do whatever the Pope says to do. You better do what the Pope man says, or he's going to send you to hell. Very scary. So the Pope also begins to more strictly enforce the tithe. A tithe, you probably tithe if you go to church. Back then, it was mandated 10% of all of your income goes to the Catholic Church. So you better pay your tithe, or you may get sent to hell. Alright, in 1093, Byzantine Emperor Alexius Comnenus, we talked about the Byzantine Empire, he sends an appeal to the kings of Europe for aid against the Muslim Turks. They're slowly encroaching into his land, as we talked about previously. Pope Urban II, he is the Pope that calls the First Crusades. He is going to call the First Crusade, and 300 years of religious warfare is going to follow. This is Urban II. So the major goal of the First Crusade, just like the following Crusades, is to gain control of the Holy Land. Again, Eastern Roman Empire is still around, but barely. It is about to be captured by the Ottomans as soon as the Crusades end, just to get you in the right frame of mind. So the Holy Land, again, this is Jerusalem, this is Bethlehem, all of those places you've heard about in the Bible or heard about at church or maybe heard about just in general. This is the Holy Land. Why do Christians want the Holy Land? Because that's where Jesus lived. It's holy. So the Holy Land was originally a territory of the Roman Empire and then the Byzantine Empire, and had only recently been conquered by the Ottoman Turks. Most people who left from Western Europe, because Western Europe, again, remember, is trying to help out the Eastern Romans against the Ottoman Turks. So most of the people who went from Western Europe to the Middle East, to the Holy Land, most of them wanted fame, fortune, and land. They didn't really care about religion so much. And then again, realized that he who controls the Middle East controls trade between 3 continents. They are also trying to gain control of the end of the Silk Road and all of the Eastern trade. So today's video is very, very important and very, very related to yesterday's video, and how these 3 peoples, Western Europeans, Eastern Roman Empire, and the Ottoman Turks, are interacting. Alright, so 3 Crusades take place between 1097 and 1192. In the first, Europeans actually do capture Jerusalem. Unfortunately, in the second, they lose Jerusalem. A general by the name of Saladin, he is a Muslim general, leads an army against the Western Europeans and basically kicks them out of the Middle East, to include retaking Jerusalem. The Third Crusade is launched to capture Jerusalem again. It fails, but the Muslims do agree that Christians can come in pilgrimage, basically come and like visit and pay respects and that kind of thing, to the Holy Land, without harm coming to them. Let's talk about some other crusades real quick. One of my favorites is the Children's Crusade. So in 1212, 30,000 children, mostly orphans, they gather together under this 12-year-old named Stephen of Cloyes. Stephen of Cloyes tells them, "I've had a vision. Jesus has come to me and said that me and my army of orphans are going to go to the Holy Land and we're going to be able to capture it." They are filled with religious fervor. They're super excited. It's going to be great. They're going to recapture Jerusalem. They're going to march there. They're going to take ships. They're going to do whatever they have to do. They all die. None of them make it. A lot of them drown at sea. A lot of them get sold into slavery. Yada, yada, yada. Long story short, doesn't work. In Spain, we have the Spanish Reconquista going on. So Spain, for much of this point in history, is conquered by Muslims. So all of this green area is actually owned by Muslims back during the Islamic Empire times. The yellow is the Kingdom of Asturias. The brown is Catalonia, or the Kingdom of Aragon. Slowly, you're going to see, if you watch the map, Catholics, Christians, are going to slowly start taking back more and more parts of Spain. So by 1300, almost all of Spain is Catholic. It's not one unified Spain yet. We've got the Kingdom of Leon, we've got the Kingdom of Castile, we've got the Kingdom of Aragon, we've got the Kingdom of Catalonia, we've got Portugal over here. And finally, what's going to push things over the edge is King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile are going to marry. They are going to unite the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile into one country, which they are going to call Spain. They are going to fight the last Muslim kingdom in Spain, with this green area down here called Granada, and they are going to kick those Muslims out in 1492. So you have one unified, kind of, except for Portugal, Iberian Peninsula, one Spain, plus Portugal, but there are no more Muslims in Spain for the first time in like 1,000 years. You also probably have heard of Ferdinand and Isabella, because these are the people who hire Columbus to go explore and try to find another route to Asia. We'll talk about that in the next unit. So once the Reconquista has completed and the Catholics have conquered Spain, this begins the Spanish Inquisition. So there's lots of people in Spain that are still Muslim. Just because the Muslims aren't in charge anymore doesn't mean they don't live there. So a special court is assembled, and anyone who is not Christian was gathered and punished. Over here on the right, we can see a gentleman on what is called the rack, and basically he's tied to a wheel. You're going to see a fire, and he's being cooked alive. No, they're not going to eat him, but they are cooking him alive. And basically they're trying to get him to admit that he is not a Christian, that he is of the devil or something, and potentially maybe convert. So thousands of Jews and Muslims, because these guys don't like anybody except Christians, publicly convert to Christianity, but privately continue to worship. Thousands that refuse to convert are tortured, imprisoned, killed. And then by the end of 1492, very important year, because this is when Columbus sails the ocean blue, who are still practicing Muslims and Jews are eventually expelled from Spain. They are all kicked out. A lot of them actually go to Italy, which is really interesting, and go live with the Pope, which is really weird. But that is what happens. Why does this happen? Basically, what it comes down to is the Catholic rulers of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, them and their ancestors have spent the last 300 years trying to kick the Muslims out, trying to retake the country, and they don't trust them. They don't trust them. They're afraid that one day they're going to rise up against them and they're going to have a huge war on their hands, which is why they do it. So politically, it makes sense in a very, very ugly, nasty, gross, awful kind of way. But the way these people were tortured and treated was not very nice, as you can see. So, consequences of the Crusades. Number one, trade expands between Asia and Europe as the Silk Road and other trade networks were opened. So, for the first time, Europeans have control of the end of the Silk Road right here when they control the Bosporus and the Middle East. This gets shut off once the Ottomans take control, which we'll talk about again later. The powers of the kings are increased because many of the most ambitious nobles died on the Crusades. The power of the Pope is diminished because he lost. The Pope told them to go because God said to. They went. They all died and lost. Doesn't make the Pope look too good. The Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, is radically weakened by Crusader invasions, and as we learned previously, this is going to lead to the Ottomans eventually taking over. A legacy of bitterness and hatred grows among Muslims and Christians. So before, where Muslims were cool with Christians and Jews, not so much anymore. They don't trust them. And it does lead to the Renaissance, the rebirth of Europe, because Crusaders bring back ancient learning, which we'll talk about on another day. So part of that learning, which is going to eventually bring us to the Crusades, is what we're going to spend the next couple slides talking about. So, lots of knowledge was lost to Europe with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, but it was saved in the Eastern Roman Empire. So when Europeans went to the Middle East, they found some of this stuff and brought it back. So for the first time, Europeans are reading some of the texts, some of the books, some of the knowledge that they had lost in 476 with the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. A lot of this knowledge was saved by Jews and Muslims, actually, and was translated back in Western Europe. They had superior technology. The Muslims were way more advanced in Western Europe in terms of shipbuilding, in terms of weaponry. They're going to bring all of this back. The first universities are formed. A university is just a college. It's a place where you go and get an advanced education. We've got multiple in the Triangle: Duke, UNC, NC State. Central is in Durham. The children of merchants and other artisans are going to start getting jobs in government, which is really important. Let's take a second to look over on the right. Up here in the top right is a Muslim ship. This is a ship that Muslims were building and using in the Mediterranean. Top left is the kind of ship that Europeans were sailing on in the Atlantic Ocean. This is the ship that Columbus used to sail across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World. You're going to notice that this is a combination of both ships. Wide square sail, really big bottom, big square sails, triangle sails, triangle sails. This ship is capable of traversing the Atlantic Ocean. These two are not. But when they combine the two, they could. This is really important. For the first time, texts are written in the vernacular. This is the language that everybody speaks. So the wealthy, the important, the nobles, remember they're speaking Latin, which is the lingua franca of the period. But poor people, normal people, me and you, are just speaking English or German or Spanish or French or something. So books are starting to be written in the vernacular. Catholic theologians, so these are guys who are writing about the Bible, they begin to meld their ideas of the Bible and religion with the old Greek and Roman texts, the most famous of which is Thomas Aquinas. Make sure you write him down. He's not a vocab word, but make sure you get him down, because he's going to apply the logic of Aristotle to the Bible. Aristotle is a Greek thinker. This is Thomas Aquinas. The agricultural revolution, Muslims were already doing this, but again, Europeans are going to copy it. Basically, they're going to switch from oxen to horses to plow their fields, because horses can plow 3 times as much land as an oxen can. This leads to forests being cleared for more farmland, which leads to more food, which leads to more people. Keep that in your brain logically. The 3-field system is really cool. This is going to come from the Middle East. Basically, you've got 3 fields. You're going to plant one with wheat, one with barley, and one is just going to be empty, and the animals are going to graze it. And then you're going to rotate these fields every year. So next year, this one will be wheat, this will be barley, this will be fallow. They're going to rotate it. That way, the nutrients can be returned into the soil every year. So instead of just growing wheat on all 3 fields every year, eventually the fields aren't going to be able to grow wheat anymore because we're out of nutrients. This allows the fields to regain their nutrients. Guilds are going to be formed. This is a super important vocab word. Make sure you get it. Guilds are going to set standards for the quality of work, wages, and working conditions of their professions. So there might be a blacksmith guild, and in the blacksmith guild they say, okay, this is what a horseshoe looks like, this is how much iron it takes, this is what it costs. Members of guilds are going to pay fees to the guilds, and these guilds are going to grow very, very powerful and prestigious, so they're going to get lots and lots of power. Finally, we have the commercial revolution. Basically what it comes down to is people leave the self-sufficient manors and go to the cities. Because of the Crusades, the cities have lots of cool stuff that people want to buy, like silk and pepper. So people are moving to the cities and the towns. They're getting work there. They're making money. Life is great. And finally, some changes in city life. Population explodes from 30 to 42 million. Again, peasants and serfs are leaving the manors. And finally, the cities do not have great sanitation. They are filled with waste. They are filled with animals.